There we go. So again, welcome to August 27, and I see an error on my slide. The Career Conversations Book Club, not Books Club. We're talking about one book today, right here with Dena Lefkowitz, Winning in Your Own Court. I'm very excited to have the conversation with Dena. Dena, welcome to the book club today.
Thank you so much, Gina. I've been looking forward to this.
As have I, as have I. So um, I'm going to just start for those of you who are new with a little bit of background information before we get into talking about Dena's career and then about the book itself, just so that everybody is on the same page. The Career Conversations Book Club initiative really marries what I have is three central loves: books and reading, powerful career conversations, and bringing people together in community. And I was really excited for the past year and a half to be able to bring authors with books and a community together, whether you're watching us live or whether you are watching us later on, the community of people who are really interested in thinking about careers in different ways and think about aspects of careers in new and invigorating ways. If you'd like, I always throw out, feel free to post your thoughts on social media with the hashtag GA Career Conversations. We'll soon hear from Dena, who I'm really thrilled to have, but a quick note about the format for tonight. So as I mentioned, we're going to follow this introduction with introductions with Dena, who's going to talk to us about her career journey. We're then going to dive into the book directly. And then the last 30 minutes or so is open to input from all of you in terms of questions or comments that you might have. So the 90 minutes really does go by quite quickly, we find. We'd ask that you keep your microphone muted until the final 30 minutes of the Q&A, but please feel free to use, I'm checking constantly the chat, so feel free to engage in the chat. We might throw some questions or comments in the chat to get you thinking about things as well. And that's open from the get-go, so please feel free to use the chat if you'd like. And then if you do ask a question or have a comment in the last little while, we do ask if it's possible for you to unmute your microphone and turn on your camera and join the conversation. As you've already seen, we are recording this session to share later on. There's a YouTube channel and we share it to anybody who had registered for today. For Ontario lawyers, the session tonight is eligible for an hour and a half of professionalism CPD with the Law Society of Ontario. I know we have lawyers from other places joining us, but we've only been able to get the Ontario CPD accreditation. And finally, before we do an introduction, one of the things that I've done over the course of this year and a half, initially I used to talk when I would facilitate meetings, I would speak about having brave conversations. And I was influenced recently by an article, or about a year ago, not recently, by an article of Elisa Hankora, and I circulated that article to people in the prep for today. And Elise reminded us that brave spaces can be exhausting. And she has put forward a framework of accountable spaces in which we're each responsible for our actions, for ourselves, for our words, our intentions. And it means entering a space with good intentions, but also understanding that aligning your intent with action is the really true test of commitment. So to that end, I try and adhere to the accountable space guidelines that I had sent around based on Elisa Hankora's remarks. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing because I want to be able to see all of you and be able to see Dena. Dena, welcome.
Thank
Many
you.
people during the times that I talk about career conversations, many people really like to know about what an author's journey is. So you've got an incredible career story, author, coach, former lawyer in various elements. Can you share with us briefly your personal highlights of your career journey? Things that you want to share with us to let us know. How did you start each of the roles you had? When did you move on? Why did you move on? Really important for us to get a sense of what has brought you to today.
I'm going to give you an overview and then feel free to ask me any questions you'd like.
Mhm.
I'm Dena Lefkowitz, and I figured out how to turn an accidental career into an intentional one. Now, I can't see any of your faces, but did everyone know exactly what they wanted to do for a living when they graduated from high school? Put your Thank you,
No.
Steve.
Jocelyn is shaking her head.
So like many people, maybe most people, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I graduated from high school. but I thought college was the ticket. And I was so sure of that, that I bet everything on it. I went into debt. I took out student loans. I waitressed 4 nights a week. And I thought that college was going to hand me a career direction and a career, which of course it didn't. I graduated and couldn't get a job where I could even afford to leave my student apartment or get a car. And I still had no idea what I wanted to do with my BA in English in hand, which, might have been part of the problem. So what did I do? I kicked the decision can down the road and threw a dart at a high-paying profession and went to law school. Not because I had any driving desire to be a lawyer, but because I thought it would be a respected profession where I would have some idea what to do and make good money. I thought of law school as a trade school, that when I came out, I would know exactly what to do, I would get a job, and I would be set for life. And in a way, it did happen. I never gave any thought to what field I might go into, or what area of expertise I might have, or what environment I might work in. I was recruited by a litigation firm for an internship. I took that. And then when that litigation firm offered me a job, I took that. I had no idea what being a litigator was going to be like. And I had unwittingly signed up for a profession where I would have to fight for a living. Now, I don't really even like sending food back in restaurants, but I signed up to fight for a living because I didn't really know myself. I didn't know the requirements of the job, and I didn't understand the relationship between those two things. I also don't really like surprises. I'd love to come to your surprise party, Gina, but please don't plan one for me. And surprises are the name of the game in a litigation firm. I literally had a suit hanging on the hook of my office door in case I was called to court on a day that I wasn't already expecting to be there. I hated being a litigator, and I hated it for 13 years. Why would I do a job for 13 years that I hated? Because that question in high school, in college, and law school still plagued me. I still didn't really know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I just knew I wasn't having such a great time doing what I was doing. I looked at job listings. I applied for jobs during those 13 years, but I had no idea how to successfully pivot from one area of practice to another, from one role to another, until I hired a career counselor. And he gave me a values assessment that really taught me a lot. I thought money was the most important thing in a job, but I had learned otherwise by experience. And yet my whole career was pointed toward how can I make the most money? And the values assessment taught me that money was far from the most important thing to me. And there were actually things that were way more important that I wasn't getting. And that's one of the reasons I was so unhappy. So I decided to take a pay cut, take a job at the school district of Philadelphia, and become an in-house lawyer. When I looked around that private law firm, I realized I don't need a Breitling watch. I don't need a second home in Cape Cod. I don't need a Porsche. Not that there's anything wrong with those things, but there were things that were way more important to me, and I got them when I joined the school district of Philadelphia. I believed in the mission, educating kids. I was part of that mission, and I was working with academics and interesting people that I really cared about and respected. My life completely changed as a result of that career counselor and that values assessment. About when I hit my 20th year as practicing attorney, I decided that I didn't want to practice for the next 20. And I figured I had at least as many working years ahead of me as I did behind me. And I started thinking about what I might do next. And this time, I wasn't going to throw the dart. No dart. I was going to do it with data. So I started thinking about what I was good at, what other people said I was good at, what I was naturally inclined to do, what I liked doing. And then one day I was sitting at a table, a registration table. I was volunteering at an event, and a total stranger started telling me his problems. Does that happen to anybody else in the
Mm-hmm.
room by any chance?
Mm-hmm.
Any hands
Absolutely.
go?
Yep.
Yep. So you know what I'm talking about. I was listening, and at one point he turned to me and he said, "You know what? You would make a great life coach." I didn't know what that was, but I decided to find out. And it turned out that one of the lawyers I used to work for was married to a life coach. So I arranged an informational interview with her so I could find out what a day in the life of a life coach was like. And I'm telling you, when I left her office, I knew that I was going to be a coach, and I knew that I was going to help lawyers. And that was the beginning of the journey that brought me to writing this book. But that was all I knew. All I knew was that I was going to be a coach and I was going to help lawyers, and I had to figure out the rest as I went along.
Wow. And
And that's
so
my story.
So I think the last story, Dina, I really am grateful to hear that because the last story sort of segues into the next question that I ask all of our authors because you are a coach. We talk about planning with our clients as coaches. We, you know, suggest coaches you suggest planning. You've got sort of a framework to follow, but then the one area that we always also ask our authors is what about serendipity in your own career? And that last example, I think, might have been one of those examples of serendipity. How has serendipity been involved in your career? Was it always planned strategically? And you just gave the example. No, tell us how serendipity weaves its way into your career.
Well, meeting Sheila Kuttner, who was the life coach I had the informational interview, was a tremendous act of serendipity because I recommend informational interviews to people all the time. And usually they consist of making a phone call and talking to the person for 15 minutes about their role and having very targeted and strategic questions to ask because you don't want to waste their time and you want to stay to that 15 minutes. Well, Sheila invited me over to her house and I spent the whole afternoon there. And I got to talk to a real life coach and kind of experience what that was like, what a coaching conversation could be like. And if that's not serendipity, I don't know what is. This lawyer I had worked with so many years ago, and I didn't even know his wife was a life coach until I started asking around when I began this inquiry of mine to figure out what the next step in my career journey was going to be.
I love it. And I've got to ask, what about being an author? Because you talk about when you started down the road of thinking to be a life coach, pardon me, a career coach for lawyers, that's when you had sort of the idea. But how did that come up? Oftentimes, what a lot of our guests like to hear is, how did you find the interest, the time to be an author, as well as everything else that you're doing?
Well,
You're
I think
smiling.
I think you're going to hate the answer because it was the pandemic.
Hmm.
I do a lot of networking. I'm here tonight. I do a lot of speaking. I write, and I still had a voice. I still had things to say, and I had nobody to say them to. And I had all of that time that I would have spent going to things and doing things and being with people. Now I was just in my house. So I started to think, how could I spend this time? We're in lockdown, right? I can't do anything. How could I spend this time where I would emerge at the end of it, maybe with an improved offering in my coaching business? And that's when I started to think about capturing my approach in a book.
I love it. I love it. So being able to capture that approach, I think, is really important. We're going to dive into the framework that you've outlined for us in winning in your
Thank
own
you.
court.
Can I
But
just say, hi, Bernie. Hi, Steve. Thanks for coming. I see Laura's name. I don't know if that means she's really here, but thank you. Thank you, Jocelyn. And thank you, everybody, for coming. I really appreciate it.
How lovely. It's good to see people. So the book, you do indicate hello, Laura. You do indicate your why at the very beginning, but I wonder if you can just sort of share with us, apart from the pandemic and needing to capture things, tell us about your why for this book. What was the actual why? Apart from the pandemic, what was your why in terms of wanting to share this with the world?
It took me a long time as a lawyer to come to admit that it wasn't working out for me.
Mm.
And it took me a long time to hire somebody to help me with that. I was ashamed that I had spent all of this time in law school and all of this time practicing law and was still so unhappy. And I waited way longer than I should have, miserable in a job every day of my life for 13 years. And I wrote the book because there are a lot of people out there just like me. And I talked to some of them on the phone. I talked to some of them on Zoom. I talked to some of them when we meet in person. But I know there are way more out there that either, haven't decided to invest in a coach or aren't really sure that this is the right vehicle for them. And I thought if they could get a taste of it, to know that they have options, that their experience means something, that what they've done up until this point matters. Those were the kinds of things that I was thinking about, how hopeless I felt. There I was for 13 years applying for jobs, knowing that I wasn't happy doing what I was doing, and just feeling like there was no way out. I had no support, I had no clue. And I also want to mention that the law is a help-resistant profession. This has been documented by psychologists who've studied lawyers. And we don't really like to ask for help. We like to give help. We're a helping profession. And so we're somewhat help resistant. And just the idea of reaching out to somebody and saying, I need help, was really scary to me. And so I feel there are a lot of people out there that might be willing to buy a book, you know?
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. And I have to say, this week I'm teaching an intensive course to 3Ls on emotional and cultural intelligence, and a lot of that precedent of what we have in the legal profession, the systemic means in the profession might be shifting a little bit, but boy, there's some real strong held beliefs even among 3Ls. Well, you can't change it in the firms. Let's think about that. Let's talk about that. These are questions that come up on a regular basis. So that just really resonated. The fact that you felt hopeless, I think, is unfortunate. But through that hopelessness, this was born, and the ability to reach out was born. So let's dive into the book. I had to. I think I chuckled with you. The first quote that you use in Law One. Perfect that you're talking to a Greek here. Aristotle, you used his quote, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. I loved seeing a good Greek quote there. Law one, you tell us, is about assessing yourself in the situation. And we've grown up being told we can do anything we want if we put our minds to it. That's a huge order necessarily, but how do we figure it out, Dena? I loved your quote at page 12, which said, great lawyers leave the law every day because of working conditions, but some leave because they don't understand how to negotiate and modify. So what are some of the steps that you suggest at this very, very early stage to help figure it out for people?
Well, the first thing is to assess the situation that you're in. How much of it is intentional and how much of it is default? When I wrote that chapter, I was really thinking of one client that I had who called me up and said, I want to leave the law. I want to leave today. Sometimes people call me when they're at the end of their rope, and that doesn't give me a whole lot to work with. I could use a little rope to hang on to. She wanted to leave the law. She was miserable. She'd been working like a mad woman. She was working for a guy who would drop things on her desk at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and then she would stay until 10 o'clock to finish them up. And that was her life, and she was burned out and she was tired of it. And when I work with people, I always like to work on parallel tracks when we're doing career transition or career transformation. First, we have to make wherever you are right now as palatable and pleasant as possible. we have to try to fix things there a little bit while we're doing this thing over here, trying to get you a new job or a new career or whatever it is. So one of the questions I asked her was why she was working so many hours and why she would always stay till 10 or 11 when the boss dropped something on her desk. And it shocks me to this day that she never ever asked him, when do you need this? She just started working on it right away. She made a bunch of assumptions. She never questioned whether they were right or wrong, and she burned herself out. She ultimately did go to have a conversation with her boss, and it turned out that it would have been fine with him the whole time. He didn't know why she was working so many hours. It wasn't required. And that was a big light bulb moment for her. She stopped working so much. She started getting deadlines. She started saying, when do you need this? She started asking for more time if she needed it. She started going home at a reasonable hour. And she fell in love with being a family lawyer again, which really surprised me because I thought we were leaving the law. So assessing the situation has to do with kind of clearing the junk away and creating some space and evaluating things and maybe doing a personality assessment, a values assessment, figuring out what your priorities are. Maybe they've shifted since you were in college or law school or wherever you are. Things change all the time. When I was a litigator, I thought I hated being in court and I never wanted to do it again. Flash forward, I'm 50 years old and I'm working in a government agency and I have a chance to go to the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, I don't like going to court. Or do I? So my fear level had changed, my preferences had changed, everything had changed. We need to reassess ourselves every once in a while to see if the things we think about ourselves are still true.
You know, it's interesting you say that, Dena, because one of the things I had in law school, I had worked for a local constituency office for a member of provincial parliament, a politician, and a lot of the information that I was doing, a lot of the work that I was doing was free advice, if you will, right? We didn't charge the constituents. And then fast forward to my first few years in practice, and one of the things that I had this really challenging issue with is the business side of the practice of law. I have to charge. 4 years ago, 3 years ago, I was giving people advice in a way that I didn't have to charge them. Now I actually have to charge them and send them a bill and collect. Oh my God, that was just horrendous. Fast forward through a variety of career changes for myself, leading to my deciding to go out as a career coach. And people say to me, remember what you talked about private practice? And I said, yeah, but that was then. Since that time, I've changed. I've become more of an entrepreneur in the work that I did at the various organizations. I'm at a different stage, and what seemed anathema at that time, would seem very difficult at that time, doesn't anymore. And there's a difference in where I'm at compared to where I was at 20 some odd years ago, 25 years ago. So you're right. We have to sit down and reevaluate because our values might be very similar, or if not the same, but our priorities will definitely have changed over the years, right?
Yeah, I'll just say one other thing about the situation with that client. We often think in employment that it's a take it or leave it situation.
Mhm.
And take it and leave it are definitely two options, but change it is a third. And changing it can be done, like my client did.
I think it's incredible because there are a number of clients where, their initial comment is, I want to leave this organization, but then a little bit of drilling, a little bit of, let's see what else might be possible. And let's see what assumptions I've made about what's possible, and what assumptions I have made about what others in the organization say, I think is really incredible. And I love how you described it as two parallel tracks, right? It's not necessary. Go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to say one other thing. It might be the most important thing.
Mhm.
Since she did that, she has received more than one promotion and more than one raise. So she has become more successful as a result of speaking up for herself, not
Mhm.
less so.
I love it. I love it. That's a really good reminder.
She's
Um,
still a family lawyer to this day. I worked with her over 10 years ago.
That's fantastic. And is still enjoying it, but
Yes,
enjoying it in a different context, right? Enjoying it in
yes.
a different way. I'm glad to hear that. So we're not going to go through all the laws necessarily, but I do want to go through the next one, Law 2, which is double down on past decisions and this fallacy of sunk costs that you discuss. But then you also later relate it to Law 8, which is it's not too late. And you've kind of said they are, I don't remember if you use the word bookends or they're related. So tell us a little bit about what you mean with each of these and how we navigate these two. This is their landmines here in terms of both of them.
Yeah. They're both stories we tell ourselves. That's what they have in common. And the fallacy of sunk costs is an economics term, and it has to do with putting weight on an investment that isn't worth anything anymore and shouldn't really be considered in making future decisions. I've heard people use the language of investment so much in careers. I said it myself. How can I how can I change careers? I invested so much in law school and in learning this career. How can I change now? And it really struck me one time when I was coaching a lawyer that I had been hired to coach by his firm. He was 29 years old or 30, something like that. And he was being coached because he wasn't meeting his billable hour requirements and he wasn't doing enough rainmaking and stuff like that. So we worked together and he got better at that stuff. On our second to last session, he said to me, he kind of does this. If I had it to do over again, I would just become a math teacher. And I said, well, what makes you think it's too late for you to become a math teacher? And he didn't answer me. And I wasn't his career coach. I was hired by his firm to coach him. So I dropped it. But at the next and last session, me that he had talked to his wife and he had made the decision he was going to become a math teacher. And my initial thought was, oh no, the firm's going to be really mad at me for doing this to them. But later, I realized, of course, that it was really the best thing for everyone because he was languishing in that job. He might have lasted a few more years, but he was never going to want to take the reins the way they wanted him to because he wasn't that into it. And it was better for the firm because they brought someone in who was a real go-getter and was into it. So that idea that it was too late for him and that he had invested so much in law school, they kind of go together in that way. But here's the way you know the difference between an expenditure and an investment. An expenditure is when you can't get it back no matter what. You know, it's gone. It's not going to appreciate, nothing's going to happen to it. And you don't have to spend any more time or effort on an expenditure. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I got confused. An investment, on the other hand, is something that grows or doesn't grow without you doing anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to put more in if it's an investment. So when you say law school is an investment, well, is that an investment that requires you to work for the rest of your life at the thing that you invested in? That makes no sense. So an expenditure is money that you spent that you can never get back. Maybe you spent it on law school. Maybe you spent it on business school, but you're never getting it back. So today, on August 27th, 2024, what do you want to do for the next part of your life? Because don't let that decision that you made that isn't working for you dictate the whole rest of it. And here's the thing, once you realize people do it with work, you see it everywhere. Relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've been in this relationship with this horrible person for so long. I've invested so much time. How can I leave now? Potato chips. I've already eaten one. I might as well have the rest of the bag.
Uh-oh.
Sunk cost thinking drags us down in our decision making because we put weight on this thing we call an investment when it was really an expenditure. Because if it were an investment, we wouldn't have to spend any more money. It would rise or fall on its own, and we would watch it. And that would be all we'd have to do. And I think that's an important distinction to make because we we guide our lives by these that we've made, and we make future decisions. We either by default, by sticking with it, or by design, we stick with these decisions way longer than we should.
And Dina, eh, somewhat different from potentially in the US and Canada, tuitions for law school started rising about 15 years ago. Before that, they were definitely not on par with where the US tuitions were. But over the last decade plus, nearly 2 decades, that that thinking of, oh my gosh, as tuitions, because I'll remember my tuition was at $1,500, and you don't think of it as much of a cost at that point, but now with tuitions being what they are and what they are in the US, for example, I've heard that phrase repeatedly. I've had too much of an investment in money, in time, and then the more years that go on, that time investment, the reputational investment. There's also that language that sometimes comes up as well. It's not just the finance or the time or the energy. But it's who I am, that identity that people have. And I'm glad that you sort of gave that sort of distinction behind it. It's not necessarily an investment. Maybe the reputation is, and I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. But
Yes,
it
I
really is an
do.
expenditure. I'd love to hear it. I
Well,
saw
first of
Bernie shaking
all,
his head. Sorry, go ahead.
this kind of thinking is the way gamblers think. I'm in so far, I might as well throw more in. When you know that what they've already lost is lost. It's not an
Yeah,
investment.
yeah.
I'm sorry, what did you ask me?
In terms of reputation, reputational
Oh,
investment.
your reputation follows you wherever you go.
Hmm.
You've 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 built that. You
Hmm.
carry it. It's in your posture, it's in your
Yep.
face, it's in your resume.
Hmm.
So maybe you're not well known in your field. And if you're talking about that kind of reputation, well, you can build a new one. When I changed over from litigation to education law, I actually became well known in the field of education law. It was a small bar in our state, and I was hired to be the charter school lawyer by the school district of Philadelphia. And I became not only a statewide expert, but a national expert on charter schools.
Your client who thought it was too late to be a math teacher, I think you said, math or music math teacher. I'm sure that his career and his reputation in that way certainly grew after he was doing something that he wanted. Anne, thanks for joining. I just wanted to look at the comment. Biggest impediment seems to be that they will, oops, now I just totally lost it. Give me 2 seconds. That they will not be seen as being able to hack it. I think you've got a good comment there. We're going to come back to that too. But Dina, you're agreeing with that comment as well, right?
That is a comment of shame.
Mm-hmm.
And the legal profession loves to make us feel shame. And it starts in law school, where they give you more work than a person can possibly do, so much so that you have to farm it out to other people and get together in study groups so that you can process all this information, because no one can read it all. And you have 20 somethings studying round the clock with no free time and no time for a social life. Then you go into private practice, and it's basically the same thing. So it's baked into the profession that you're not going to have a life.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and so we're gonna move on. Risk aversion, says Steve, but also the practical reality that lawyers are pretty well paid. There is that comment as well, for risk aversion for sure, and we're going to come back to risk aversion, I think, in a second. But the fact that there is a certain financial status and a financial opportunity with the careers that we choose is really important. But Dina, you made the comment earlier as well. You thought your original career trajectory was based with the value of money until you sort of sat back and did a reevaluation of what really is important to you. What is it that you want to guide things? So again, I think it's definite risk aversion, but also the thought that that's what we're destined to do and nothing else, right?
Yes, and context is important too. I grew up in a family that never had enough money. So
Hmm.
that's why I thought it was so important. And once it's like the Maslow triangle of pyramid of needs. You know, once I got to the point where I was making a good living, I realized I didn't have to be rich.
Yeah, yeah. I like that comment. Now, I talking about treasures of the book. I really resonate. I think I've already shared this with you before. Chapter 4, or Law 4, rather, was. I still think it's one of my favorites, not just for the content, but also your very creative labeling of it. So you talk about curating your career. And it makes taking responsibility for our career both more empowering and creative. Can you tell us how you came up with this law? I love
Yeah.
that conversation of thinking about your career as something you should curate, and what it means to you, and why worthwhile collections take commitment and strategy. That was from page 62 of the book. Love the gems in this chapter in particular.
Thank you so much, Gina. That means a lot to me. I came up with the idea of curation because my husband, Rolando, used to work at the Philadelphia Museum of Art in the Department of 20th Century Art as a curatorial assistant, and he worked with the curators. And I saw what they did when they had big shows at the Philadelphia Art Museum. Rolando would actually fly to collect other museums because they won't let them leave without somebody actually physically touching them. So I got to see how major museums put together the big collections the special exhibits that we go to see, and how much thought is put into them, and kind of how they think about it. And when I thought about becoming a coach, I realized that everything I had done up until that point was going to matter. I worked at a daycare center. I was a waitress. I was a personal injury lawyer. I was a school lawyer. My through line in my career has been about helping people.
Yeah.
It's not accidental that a lot of times when you see a resume, you think, well, that person had a lot of crazy jobs, but maybe it's not so crazy. Maybe there's actually a through line to it if you pay attention to it and you remember why you gravitated to those jobs, why you took them, why they seemed interesting to you. I had a collection of helping people. That was what my life was about. And actually one of my highest Hogan scores is in altruism. One of the reasons I became a personal injury lawyer was that I really thought I could make a difference in people's lives. And I did. I did make a difference in people's lives doing that work. It was the acrimony in getting to that result that drove me away from that line of work. But otherwise, I was aligned with the idea of helping victims get compensation.
I appreciate it. Steve, thank you for your note. I know that you may have to sign off, and that's fine. I appreciate it. Dena, I love the way that you've just used the language of a through line to your career. And sometimes we don't see it until we actually sit and think about it, and have somebody else maybe hold the mirror to that collection that we've gotten, the through line. What are the connecting dots to the choices that we have made, and the treasures that we have collected along the way as our career. And I love the idea of that as curating it. Sometimes it is intentional, and sometimes it's sort of unknown to us as to why we've taken certain opportunities,
Oh,
right?
that's definitely true.
Mm-hmm.
But I can actually tell you that I liked all of those jobs. I loved working in daycare. I loved being a waitress. I
Mm-hmm.
loved doing all of those jobs when I was doing them.
Yeah. Sandra, I really wanted to just come back to the comment that you made, that I think the world can lock you in as well. Why would you want to work as a fill in the blank, other than anything other than a lawyer judge when you are a lawyer? When I first left practice and it ties into something that I believe it was that Steve had said earlier in terms of the salary. Um, when I first decided to leave the practice of law, private practice, to move into a law school setting to start the career development office in that law school, one of the senior partners, when I told him, and I had a really great relationship with him, I really respected him, and we respected each other, and he said to me, "You're going to leave to do what? You're going to start a career office? But you're leaving law. You're going to be directing other people or helping other people in terms of figuring out what they want to do with the legal department, their legal careers. And he just couldn't grasp it at that time. And then as we started chatting about it a little bit more, he was a little surprised I'd want to leave the practice of law. And within about half an hour of a conversation, he opened up to me and he said, at that time he was about, oh, he's 10 years older. And he said, had I thought about this earlier, I may have made different choices. He says, I now have, children in certain schools. I have a certain lifestyle and I'm kind of locked in. Had I known then that I could have spoken to him in a different way, I might have had a different career conversation with him. But in that moment, he felt that he was stuck. And he thought the only thing that he could do with his law degree was to actually be a lawyer and nothing but. And that's what a lot of our clients come to us, right?
Yeah, I had a lot of conversations like that when I decided to leave the law, at which time most lawyers hadn't even heard of professional coaching. The field really wasn't that old. You're going to do what? You're going to do what? And whenever somebody speaks to you that way, to me, that is a dead giveaway that they're having a problem with it for something that has to do with them and not you.
Hmm.
They're either threatened or jealous, or they didn't know there was a way out of the law until you
Yeah,
showed them.
exactly.
So yeah, that's a heavy reaction that people have, as if you're taking something away from them by what you're doing.
Yeah. Now, part of that is navigating that with emotional intelligence. And I want to go into Law 6 for a second. And I'm so glad I'm a big proponent about talking about emotional intelligence. And I hate the term soft skills because I think they're the hardest skills to learn, frankly. But you spend a full chapter on honing your soft skills. And I love the story that you tell us about you and a client once. I want to leave it to you to tell us about that story and why you think that emotional intelligence skills are so important in the profession of law or law adjacent.
Okay. Hi, my name is Dena, and I made a client cry once. I didn't mean to, and it's actually one of the worst stories from my legal career. I thought I was a pretty nice person. I thought I would have said I was emotionally intelligent if I had heard those words at that time. I was compassionate and considerate. But I was working on this case, big case for my office, big case. And I was the second chair to my boss, who was the managing partner of the litigation firm where I was working. And I was in charge of the day-to-day details of the case. And we had just been assigned a judge. And the client was also a lawyer, a female lawyer with more experience than me. And she called me up to talk about the judge, and she started to launch into why this was not a good thing for the case. And I held up uh, the verbal equivalent of a stop sign. And I interrupted her, and I started talking about why the judge was good for the case and why we thought it was a great thing. And she went, well, and then she started crying and hung up on me. I didn't know what to do. I sat there staring at the phone like I didn't know. I was frozen for a moment. And then the phone rang, and it was her. And this is the worst part of the story for me. She was calling to apologize for crying, when I should have been the one apologizing for my appalling professional conduct, for not listening to her, for not respecting the client, for not obeying the rules of professional conduct regarding communication with clients and upholding their faith in the judicial system. I didn't do any of that stuff. I just acted like an ass. And could have gotten us fired from the case. So I was lucky I did that with a woman who called me up and apologized instead of a man who probably would have called me up and fired me. I hate to sound so stereotypical, but a man would have not have called to apologize. This story would never have happened with between two men. or if it had been a man. So that put a light bulb over my head, Gina, about how I really hadn't learned what I needed in law school in order to fulfill my responsibilities to manage client conversations in a way that would be dignified and respectful, that I could lose my job if I didn't get it together and learn how to not be so defensive. Defensiveness was what got in the way of that call. I was insecure and defensive. And so when she started talking to me about her probably more experienced knowledge about this judge, I had to shut her down because we're the lawyers, we're the experts, we're going to tell you about this judge. And she might have known just as much about him or more. And I didn't listen and I didn't learn. And that's I get clients sent to me by their law firms who are lawyers who are having the same problems as I did, because they don't talk about bedside manner in law school. They don't teach us exactly how we're supposed to uphold those rules of communication, or even teach us communication skills in law school. We learn nothing about how to carry out the profession other than researching case law and writing and arguing in court. All of the essential skills for a business owner or an employee are learned on the job.
I'm
And
going to shout out, sorry, I'm going to shout out this law school now for having this mandatory 3L course, even though it's only 5 days and you just scratch the surface, even having the students think about, oh, clients cry in front of you, or clients get mad, or clients withhold, or clients do ABC. What am I supposed to do? So I appreciate that story, your reaction so many years later, your reaction to that story, Dena, I think tells us of how important this thinking of skills that you need to bring to a relationship that you have, a professional relationship, is really critical. Your reaction right now, several years later, to that circumstance, I think just is sort of the cap to it in terms of why it is so very important. It stays with you, and it probably stayed with that client as well for a while.
probably.
So, um, I'm looking at Laura's comments. Struggle in so many professions, not just the law. Yeah, I'm happy to hear that communication skills are being taught. Absolutely, I think we're moving the dial a little bit, right? Maybe
If I'm
not
not
as.
mistaken, Laura spent a lot of time in academia, and even though they write a lot, they aren't always the best communicators either. Am
Yeah,
I right, Laura?
I think she's right about that.
Absolutely. We
Yeah,
I was in the medical profession, so and you'd think doctors would be better at this, but you'd be wrong.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, absolutely. I think those the interactions with clients, patients, whoever it is that we're servicing is something that's really, really important. Um, Dena, let's just a couple more of the laws, then we're going to open it up for more comments and questions. If you don't make it rain, you wrote in chapter 7, you will never gain the leverage needed to take control of your career. That quote, it's sort of the quote that I used in some of the materials for tonight's session. Such an impactful quote within Law 7, make it rain. And I love how you remind us that in law school we learn about some of the big cases. You got me thinking about how do we get a course on this. We learn about the big cases, but not necessarily how those cases were acquired or how the clients were acquired. So for extroverts and introverts, tell us how to think about rain and making it rain in the legal profession.
Well, I don't know what the situation is in Canada, but in Pennsylvania, where I practiced law, it was illegal to advertise until 1972.
Mhm.
And a lot of the law firms that were originated either then or before then. So even today in 2024, there's still a lot of, some people still don't feel right about legal advertising or legal marketing. It's also the only industry that doesn't have a sales force. We're the only ones that are expected to be the professionals and also drum up the business. And it's illegal to pay somebody to procure a client for you. unless it's another lawyer. So it really, it puts up a pretty high bar for even getting clients. But the reason it's so important is that you'll never have any autonomy in a firm if you're not a rainmaker. And I learned this as I learned all of the laws in my book through the School of Hard Knocks rather than law school. I was working for a firm. I was about 10 years out, and the firm decided to close, and all of the lawyers were looking for jobs. I was a very experienced, excellent lawyer, but guess who the ones that were getting the offers were? The ones that had a book of business, the ones that had a track record of getting clients, the ones who demonstrated the potential to bring in business to the firm. After you're about 10 years out, you're kind of you're a non-essential. They can hire a 5-year lawyer to do your job, you know? And I realized that if I didn't have I did get a job, by the way, I got a really good job, but I decided that I was not going to put myself in that precarious position again. And I had one of those Scarlett O'Hara moments, and God is my witness. I will get my own clients if I'm going to be in private practice. And that's what I did. And it is actually one of the reasons I ended up going into government work, because a lawyer in private practice spends many hours working and many hours getting the work. And I liked being in-house where I never had to worry about getting clients.
Well, it's interesting you say that because even we have a couple of people who have spent time in house and your experience as well. Even though you don't have to get clients, there's still, you might not have to make it rain necessarily in terms of the book of business, but you still have to, and maybe this is the emotional intelligence part as well. Internally, you've got business clients and you've got to be able to navigate those relationships nonetheless, whether you're with government, whether you're with in-house offices, you are still navigating relationships. And if not building a book, you're certainly building those relationships and those expectations, right?
I completely agree. I would say that you're still in the rainmaking business in a different way. You still have to be persuasive. You have to get people to buy into your initiatives. You have to get people to jump on board, and that takes a little salesmanship sometimes, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. And what I loved about that chapter in particular, and today it was actually a conversation that came up today at the very beginning of the course today. I brought in Susan Cain's book Quiet, and I love that book. And it was there'd been some feedback the day before that some people did not like contributing or participating in class. They were more quiet, they were more introverts. So I wanted to sort of address that, and we talked
Mhm.
about the culture of introverts, for example, and whether you're an extrovert or an introvert or an extroverted introvert or and vice versa, um, there are ways to make it rain. There are ways to build those relationships that are authentic to each of us.
Absolutely. I coached one of the most introverted people I've ever met, and I can document that because she was a 0 in sociability on the assessment that I use, which means she's really not a people person. And you could tell in the way that she spoke, she was kind of abrupt. And, she never asked me how I was doing. She never asked me if I had a good weekend. She wasn't like that. But she had a superpower that I realized, which was she also didn't really care if she got rejected. So she was able to make calls to people and pitch work and do stuff like that without going through what I see a lot of other lawyers go through. Will they hire me? Will they call me back? Will they? She didn't experience that at all. And I started to think of that as her marketing superpower. Um, Introverts are also often very good listeners. And sometimes with sales, it's more important to listen than it is to talk so that you can follow up with exactly what the person is looking for and needs. The big three of rainmaking are giving speeches, writing articles, and keeping in touch. And I think it's the keeping in touch that fouls up most people I work with because, they'll go to a networking event and they'll feel really good about it. But then don't sit down and put the people into their LinkedIn profile. They don't connect with them. They don't send a follow-up note. And then a month later, they've forgotten all about that person and they haven't increased their network one iota. So whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, having a keep in touch system is important. And there are great things that each can do. One thing I've noticed about introverts is they're really good at giving speeches and, have more trouble sometimes with the one-on-one, So you can put together a recipe for marketing that will suit a person's personal preferences, regardless of whether they're more on the introverted scale, more on the extroverted scale, or an ambivert, which is what I am, a little bit of both.
There's so much more on that topic, but let's just move on. We might come back to it in a second, but change. That's what Law 9, I don't know why I said rule, Law 9 is all about. And it can be hard. We've all been through change. We all, as a global community, were going through changes 4 years ago. A lot of discomfort as you move to what we've known to what's new. And I love the quote that you said at page 127. You cannot climb a ladder while clinging to your old baggage. You encourage us to create this environment for change. Tell us what you mean by creating that environment, Dena.
All of the people who contact me for coaching are busy. In fact, sometimes that's the reason they're calling me. They're overwhelmed. They feel like they're on a hamster wheel and they can't get off. And one day it rolls into another, into another, into another. And then they want to accomplish 15 things in the first month of coaching. That's usually the combination. The overwhelmed person who wants to accomplish 15 things in coaching. And so when I say create an environment for change, it's kind of like gardening. If you plant plants too close together, they can't thrive and that you can't attain growth. So what I'm talking about when I say create an atmosphere for change, I'm talking about creating some space so we can do the work that we're going to do in the coaching relationship, whether you're in coaching or whether you're following along with a book or doing your own program. You have to set that time aside. And if you're a really busy person, you don't have any time to set aside. There isn't any just lying around that you can say, oh, I'll stick that in there. It doesn't work like that. So I help people identify energy drainers, things that are robbing them of time or energy that they might be able to minimize or eliminate altogether. I usually ask people to write down 5 energy drainers in my initial preparation materials. And I've seen everything from clutter to calls from a relative. And there are steps you can take for any kind of energy drainer. If it's clutter, obviously you can deal with that. If it's a complaining relative who you're devoting time to every week because they just have to call you up and complain about the thing that they're never going to change, right? They're never going to change it. They're just going to complain to you about it. And that's where you could just reduce the amount of time you spend listening to that. You don't have to listen to that for an hour every week if it's always the same and it never changes. There might be something more beneficial that you can do with your time. So things like clearing clutter, getting rid of energy drainers, and also having an attitude that you can do this. I went for physical therapy once for my neck, and the physical therapist said, among other many questions in her checklist, how confident are you that you can recover from this pain? And I said, I'm totally confident. And I thought, why the hell is she asking me that? But I realized later, of course, that it's a pretty relevant question, because if I think I can't recover, then I can't.
Yeah.
It's
Mindset
like that
matters.
Henry Ford quote, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right. Now, healing from an injury might have a few other things to do with it, obviously, but your mental attitude that you bring with you is going to have some effect on it. So there's a quote that I love. I think I put it in the book. You can't expect to be a lucky dog if you're always growling.
I don't remember seeing that, but I love it. I think that is so true. No, that you're absolutely right. And you talk about mindset, you talk about clutter. You also part of the description, whether it's clutter or the conversations with loved ones, is about setting boundaries as well and being able to be uh, to understand what you need and being able to say yes or no. Let's talk for 20 minutes. Let's talk for 15 minutes. Let's put this away. Let's put that away. And being able to set those boundaries is really important. And you're empowering your clients, you're empowering people to do so.
Yes, and the other thing is you can't throw a rock in the water and not cause ripples.
Mm,
So expecting that you're going to make these changes and everybody's just going to be fine with them is also something to consider, because as you draw boundaries, other people are going to say, well, why isn't she doing this for me anymore? Or why can't she talk to me? And learning to say yes to yourself and no to somebody else is a really important thing. And it doesn't come naturally to a lot of us. I have had to work on my no muscle. And
yep.
you can create a room in your house out of no's if you start doing it, and go in there and do all the things that you want to do, you know?
You just gave me the analogy. I'm trying to do some exercise, some training, and I'm trying to work on various muscles, but now creating that, working on the no muscle, is a really great analogy. I really appreciate that.
Thank
I'm
you.
glad that in the book you spent time in Law 10 on people's well-being, and I think it's something that we forget. You talk about the systemic issues in our profession, and just like the ABA had a report, the National Canadian Association for Bar, the Canadian Bar Association had also done a recent report, and some of the findings are surprising or unsurprising. But the comment that there are systemic issues that it'll take stakeholders, all stakeholders, judges, regulators, legal employers, you say a bar association, legal assistance programs, and I'm going to add law schools. That's one group that you didn't have in that group. And I think I'm going to add law schools and legal academics to it, have been called to address the crisis. But then you also say that apart from the systemic, until those changes are made, those transformations are made, we need to also individually think about our wellness. And you talk about valuing and making it a priority to cultivate our individual well-being. I oftentimes, when we're dealing with transition, that'll be one of the key components that I raise with clients. Let's not forget, while you're going through this change, what do you need to do to keep up your wellness? You talk about 6 areas to achieve well-being, and some of the key ways. Can you share with us what those 6 key areas or what the key ways are to be able to maintain wellness that you work with your clients, Dena?
Sure. First of all, I want to say a couple of things. When I was in maybe my first year of practice, I was having trouble catching my breath. And I went to my doctor and I wanted him to give me a pill for my anxiety. And he said to me, if I write exercise 3 times a week on a prescription pad, will you do it?
Good
And
one.
he wouldn't give me the drugs.
Mhm.
And I am forever grateful to him, because he could have set me on the path of being a drug dependent lawyer, of which there are many. Drug and alcohol abuse run rampant in the legal profession. And these findings that were made about well-being are, that 20% or more of lawyers are depressed and anxious and having suicidal thoughts. It's really quite a compelling thing. I also wanted to mention that I neglected my health and wound up flat on my back as a result of getting no exercise and not taking care of myself. One day I could not get up from my desk, and I ended up flat on my back with an injury for 4 weeks. So we run the clock out on our health sometimes. And there's a quote about, don't let today's uh, time crunch become tomorrow's health problem, something like that. So the 6 domains are emotional health. How do you feel? Are you content? Are you anxious? The second is occupational pursuits. Is your work contributing to or detracting from your desired state of well-being? How's the job treating you? The third is creative or intellectual activities. When was the last time you ... When I was 5 years a lawyer, I realized that I had barely read one book in that entire time. And I was an English major and I love to read. So I joined a book club, so at least I would be kind of required to read one book a month. So when was the last time you fill in the blanks? I was working with a lawyer who hadn't touched his guitar in a year until we started working together. And I'll never forget the sound in his voice when he told me that he was playing the guitar again. We drop these things that matter in order to get more work done. The fourth is sense of spirituality or purpose. Why am I here? What am I doing? Does this matter? Physical health. Am I taking care of myself? Am I eating on the run? Am I eating junk food? Am I taking in a lot of salt and fat? Am I moving my body? Am I stretching? Am I maintaining this vehicle that's supposed to get me through the rest of my life? And then finally, social connections. And this is a big one that has come to more prominence during the pandemic because we've suddenly become aware of how lonely everybody is. And it existed before the pandemic. It got worse during the pandemic, and people are still isolated, and loneliness is an epidemic. And doctors or experts are saying that it's really serious, that the loneliness epidemic could lead to more mental health problems than a lot of these other things.
Dena, the six areas that you talk about, it's interesting because it almost begins in law school. And I, as when I was assistant dean, I would see it in my first year students who in November, just before the exams, would come in saying, I'm overwhelmed. And you talked about that aspect. I'm overwhelmed. I can't do this and that. And I would sort of ask them, when was the last time you, as you did, and I can't do that. I can't do that. And I would almost force them and say, this weekend, no studying, go to the movie, go meet your friend that you haven't seen for a while, go shopping, whatever it is that you like to do. And the no, I can't is the first response. And I hear that in junior associates. I hear it in mid-level associates. I hear it later on in more senior associates. And almost sometimes is somebody giving permission to say, yes, you can. And if you don't, it's going to cost you more than what you think it will, that not doing it will, right?
Yeah.
That permission is really incredible. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just, there's so much to say about mental health, and I'm glad that that was part of the framework as that 10th law. Let me just pause. I've got another couple of questions, but we can leave them if we need to. I want to open it up to others who might have comments about anything that you've heard, questions of Dena and for her and about the book or about careers. Let me just pause and open it up to others. You can either put your hand up if you've got if you want to join us, and unmute and join the conversation, please. Bernie, over to you first, please.
Thanks, Dena, for sharing those great comments. I have a question about the interviews you had with people when you informed them that you were thinking about a career change and you wanted to hear their thoughts about what their career is like, what's good, what's bad about it. I was wondering what kind of preparation you do to make those interviews as effective as possible. Do you contact the person in advance and tell them what you're thinking about? Do you give them a list of things you would like them to think about in advance, or do you make it just free form and say, tell me what you think?
I'm so glad you asked that question. I recommend contacting them in advance to say, I'd like to talk to you about your role and your day-to-day. I'm thinking about making a career change myself and would like 15 minutes of your time to talk about that, if you could spare that. I've never had anyone say no to 15 minutes, and I've never had a client come back and tell me that anyone said no to 15 minutes. And then I recommend really thinking about what would make a difference to you. What do you really want to know about this role? And then put them in order of priority. Like the first one, the most important ones first, because when the 15 minutes is over, you want to wrap up the call unless the person says, I don't mind spending a few minutes more with you, Bernie. You know, you want to stick to that agreed upon time and conclude it. So you want to ask questions like, you know, what is the hardest part of this job? What do you like the most about it? What is your day-to-day like? What do you spend most of your time doing? What do you wish you had known before you got into it? And things like, and what would you suggest to somebody who wants to get into it? Things like that. And you never ask for a job and you never ask for leads. That's why it works so well, because the person is under no obligation to you other than to spend 15 minutes, and they know they're not going to be hit up for anything. And mine turned into a much longer one, of course, but if I had only had the 15 minutes, I would have done it that way, by figuring out what was really important to me to know. And I also have to say that people have actually called me to ask about my career. It hasn't happened a lot, but it's happened a few times, and I find it super flattering. So I think that that's how most people are going to feel when you call them for an informational interview. You want to know how I got where I am? First of all, are you kidding me? Second of all, of course.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Any other questions or comments?
Well, I'll ask a follow-up to that same question. Do you find it's as useful to meet with complete strangers with these questions, or do you prefer dealing with people that you have some sort of a relationship with?
They're almost always strangers, because I don't usually know somebody who's doing the exact thing that I'm interested in, or my client doesn't usually know somebody who's doing the exact thing. And I actually think that's also part of what makes it so effective. You know, the stranger doesn't have to look out for you and your preferences because they don't know you. They don't have to warn you or worry about you or have any emotional stake in the outcome at all, which makes it easier to do, because I wouldn't want to tell you how great the job is and then you hate it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Bernie.
Did I answer
sorry?
the question?
Yep. No, you answered the question. Anne, over to you. Welcome. Good to see you again. Oh, you're on mute. Hang on.
Hi, Anne.
There we go.
Hi. I loved your book. I don't say that lightly. I thought it was incredible, and it very closely mirrored the experience that I went through to finally get things together, which also took 13 years, by the way. So there you go.
Magic number.
the I as I was going through it, the difficulty that I had, because I was in some very difficult circumstances, and the whole thing about not burning bridges means that I have not talked about it with absolutely anyone, and rather unfortunately Gina wasn't career coaching at the time when I needed her. The difficulty that I had in sort of getting out of that feeling of overwhelm and the stress and all of that, um, was the fact that I couldn't, I was within working situations where I was not able to change the circumstances. It's not unusual within firms, especially in Canada. Just to understand, there are far more lawyers than there are jobs, which means that bad people will take it as an opportunity to treat you like garbage. I have stories that are so appalling, it sounds like fiction. So when you've got the plan sort of set out, because I knew I was within those jobs for a certain period of time, there was a skill set that I needed because I had it in the back of my mind how it was going to set out in my resume so I could sell myself for the next role. But what kind of advice would you give to someone who's sort of stuck in a position, who needs to be there for at least a little while in order to be able to propel them to the next step, but is in a situation that is soul sucking.
Yeah. What I did when I was in that situation was I took the Penn mindfulness-based stress management program. That's a commitment of time, I understand, but it really helped me in separating myself from what was going on in the toxic culture that I was working in. Do you have any experience with meditation?
Oh yeah, no, I meditate. I didn't for a while. This like came from I'd gotten to the point where I was about 10 years in, and I realized yeah, about 10 years in, and I realized that I had forfeited 10 years of my life.
Oh,
And so I started taking up like massive changes after that, and I got very, very sick. So I took changes after that to sort things out. But while I was within that spiral, I, I even when I tried to meditate, even when I was doing yoga classes or anything like that, my mind was not still.
yeah.
So I mentor a lot of young lawyers and who are in very difficult situations, and you seem to know what you're talking about. So I would appreciate any advice that I can kind of pass along.
Well, there's really nothing that you can do to make a person bulletproof to abuse, harassment, and toxic work cultures. The only thing that they can do is reduce their exposure to it. So don't spend any more time in it than you absolutely have to keep your job, and actually assess what you need to do to keep your job. Because like my client that I told you about earlier, she made a lot of assumptions. So figure out what it's going to take to stay there, to keep your job. If you can't afford to leave it, and get out. Get out. Get another kind of job. If there are too many lawyers in Canada, then maybe find another way of making a living, plan your career transition, plan your career transformation. Let me tell you, I went to coaching school while I was still working full-time as a lawyer. I started my coaching business when I was still working full-time as a lawyer. I would coach in the evenings, I would coach on the weekends. That was one of the reasons I knew I liked it so much, because I would come home from a long day of being a lawyer, and being a lawyer is hard. No matter where you're doing it, it's hard work. It's responsible. You're responsible for other people's problems. I would come home after a long day at work, have dinner with my husband, and then go into the other room and coach a client or two. And I would come out and he would say, "You're beaming," right? So I knew I was on the right track. I don't know the specific problems that are going on in your firm. I don't know if it's unreasonable hour expectations or hostile, bosses, or if it's a combination of all of them. There isn't much you can do to change work
Yeah.
expectations with respect to billable hours. They are what they are. And if that expectation isn't suitable, then you would need to find a firm with fewer billable hours. But if we're talking about toxic behaviors, is there an HR department involved at all?
This was with a firm that I used to work at, because I'm in an awesome position right now. I have a
Oh,
great job,
good. Glad
but
to hear that.
it was it, what I found out after I left was just horrifying. Where I was talking to partners, and it was the entire structure of the firm was supporting very bad behavior because the department made money.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
there's a line in your book as well that so much ter- terrible conduct on the part of lawyers is forgiven because they make money.
Oh, yeah. And that says a lot about a firm. What it's willing to tolerate in its partners says everything about the culture there. And if you're working for a place like that, I'm afraid I don't have a lot of advice other than, when I was saying earlier, take it, leave it, or change it. The fourth option is to change yourself and your reaction to it. And that's why I recommended that and the program, the mindfulness-based stress management, because you have to somehow carve out some space between you and them, you know?
Oh
And
yeah, it was a lesson I wish I had known when I was going through it, and something that, for me anyway, my personal time has now become sacred. And it doesn't mean my work, I'm working more, I'm far more productive, but that was the biggest lesson.
I had a boss say to me once, "You don't have free time. Your time is my time." And he pointed his finger at me just like that. And I decided that I didn't want to work at his firm anymore
yeah.
because you can't have my time. Sorry. It's not up for sale.
And Dina, I think that's such a really good reminder to people. And Anne, I'm glad to hear that you have reprioritized yourself and have found
Yes.
yourself.
Cheers to
In
you.
cheers to you, indeed. I think that's really important. And I just want to say it's not just in private practice. I'd experienced it in government where I did the leave it position or that decision with toxicity. It happens in various work environments, and it can be difficult. And this is where I think, as Dina said, apart from finding opportunities for meditation and self-care, being able to find somebody to help you build those boundaries that you might need is so critical. And I'm grateful that people have you as a mentor to help talk through some of those opportunities. Sometimes that is absolutely invaluable.
Yeah, it
Sandra,
sounds like you
sorry.
DIY'd it, Anne.
You did. Kudos to you. Sandra sorry, I don't know if that was a hand or if it was just you've come on board to join the conversation.
Yeah, no, I actually don't necessarily have a question, but more that a lot of the book spoke to me, and it was really interesting in that there's a lot of things that I've already started to do, but they seem to be sort of independent or independent thoughts. And your book kind of tied them together, that they were actually very interconnected, and this that it wasn't such a unique experience to me. Like, when was the last, and Gina was touching on it earlier, like when was the last time you read a book? Or like, what do I even like? Like, do I like, I've spent so much time being focused on um kind of checking off the boxes and reaching the next hurdle. Okay, go to university and then graduate and then get into law school and then find an articling position and then okay, and then it's like Cinderella, and then you live happily ever after. All right, you got the degree and you're a lawyer and it's perfect now. And what do? And you look up finally, because it's hard work to get here. And I think a lot of times for myself, that's something I'm working on. I discount all of the efforts that we do for ourselves. So it was a lot of hard work to get here, but now I look up and I'm like, okay, I'm not doing all of that hard work anymore. I don't, where does all that energy go now? Okay, if it's not into my job, well, I spent so much time cultivating education and career that I didn't cultivate everything else. And now I'm looking around, I'm like, okay, what do I like? Do I like this food? Do I like this food because I actually like the way it tastes, or because I think I'm supposed to like it, or that's what's expected of me? And so it's almost like this like rediscovery of self. Um, and so you're talking about going back and retracing your steps. I thought was really good because it's sort of I always have sort of like that Robert Frost poem, the path not taken. And so it's like, well, go back to the fork in the road. You can totally go the path not taken, but you don't have to stay on this path. You can go back and try the other fork. So I thought that was a really interesting point in your book, but it was the fact that I've kind of been having all of these thoughts and not as part of one conversation or, one goal. And your book just kind of shone a light or tied them together, like, hey, actually these are all branches of sort of the same process. You just didn't realize that you've been working on this puzzle in all of these different places, kind of thing. You sort of connected them for me.
Thank you. That means so much to me, Sandra. Thank you.
I think
No, you're
Sandra,
welcome. Thank you for sharing that.
Dina, one of the things that, and I think what I'm hearing from Sandra, what I experienced as I mentioned to you, was that the fact that you've laid it out as a framework, you know, and maybe you could, to Sandra's point of the puzzle pieces, is it always so linear? Law one, law two, law three, law four, law five, or is there some, you know, do the puzzle pieces get mixed up sometimes?
Puzzle pieces definitely get mixed up. Sometimes a lawyer will call me because he or she wants to start getting clients and they don't know where the first place to start would be. So we might assess the situation. We always assess the situation, but I don't always do a personality and values assessment. There has to be a reason to do an assessment. What are we trying to figure out? What do we need to know? Are we looking at values? Are we looking at preferences? So there's always data collection. That's like discovery, you know, that's part of every coaching engagement. But not everybody needs to improve their soft skills or wants to or is looking for that. So I go with what the client comes to coaching for. And I don't enforce my laws on anybody who doesn't want them. So they pick what they want to work on, and it usually goes in a similar trajectory with respect to getting data and getting to know the person, getting to know what they're looking for, but definitely not. I would say a few of them typically come in like creating the environment for change and the mindset for sure almost always come into every coaching engagement. It cracks me up, in fact, when I hear coaches call themselves mindset coaches, because that is what a coach is. You know, all coaches help. That's one of the reasons coaching is so effective, because two heads are better than one. And when we circle through our thoughts, we always come to the same conclusion because we created a track that goes to that destination. And when someone interrupts the journey and says, well, wait a second, why does it have to be like that? We go, oh, right. That's just something I've believed for a long time and might not be a fact.
Sandra, I'm really glad to hear that the puzzle pieces are there and that you're sort of seeing the shape take place. So I'm really glad to hear it. I want to be respectful of people's time, so I just want to remind people that if you wanted to contact myself or Dina, we've got Dina's email up, we've got her website, and Dina, to your point throughout the book, and I love the name of your organization too, Achievement by Design, being very intentional about the careers that we have. And I love that your website has that listed as well. Can I just ask you, as we're closing, Achievement by Design, is that something that you came up with for the book, or was that predating the book?
It's something that I came up with for the book. And I went to when I was a personal injury lawyer, I met an engineer and he said to me, to err is human, to forgive design. And it always stuck with me, that quote from that engineer, you know, to err, it was, you know, to err is human. So success doesn't happen by default, only by design. And so when I was thinking about how to express that, that was what I came up with.
I love it. No, I love it. And thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, your framework, your laws with us, for offering us a path forward to create that career by design. And one of the reminders in the later part of your book is, and I think it's really important, and I'd want to end is to dump the regrets, instead to treasure your past for the gold mine that it is, as you set new precedents for yourself. And I think that reminder, the gold mine that our experiences up until now are for us, and to really help to set our new precedents intentionally and by design. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
For
Sure, may
lawyers
I
who,
just say,
yes, please.
thank you for buying my book. For all of you who bought the book, I really appreciate it. If you would be kind enough to go on Amazon and leave a star rating, I'd really appreciate that. And also, now that we know each other, if you want to link in with me, I'm on LinkedIn a lot and I post a lot. So it'd be nice to stay connected.
That would be wonderful. And anybody watching this later on, same thing for you. Please feel free to connect with Dena as well. And for any Ontario lawyers, remember the 1.5 hours of professionalism that's available. Before I close, I just want to remind you that next month's Career Conversations, we're going to take a little bit of a different dive. Once a year, I have a piece of fiction, and Natalie Jenner is a former lawyer who is has become an author. She was a former lawyer who then worked in professional development at various firms in Toronto until she's gone off and done some really amazing work with her books. And what I love is there are career issues within her books. They're historical fiction. I think they're very enjoyable. I've read 2. I'm getting ready to read this one for next month. So I hope that you'll join us. But for now, I really want to thank Dena for joining us and for all of you for participating in the career conversation. Dena, thanks so much. I really am grateful to you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Good
Take
night.
care, everyone. Bye now.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.